Africa, smartphones are fueling an iGaming revolution.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our panel. Very interesting discussion points today around how Africa's smartphones are fueling an iGaming revolution. I think in general, everyone knows that Africa has a very complex and robust mobile economy. Most African consumers have skipped desktop and access the internet and transact exclusively on their mobile phones. So this has really created a hotbed of innovation in the space and creates a very interesting use case for iGaming businesses operating on the continent. So today, I was planning to do some intros, but I guess those have already happened. We've got a great team with us today. Daniel, who is the Senior Business Development Manager at Genius Sports. A lot of experience working with various operators across the continent. Conor, who is the Africa partner for Tekkorp Capital, been involved in plenty of businesses and operations throughout Africa, and definitely the most African Irishman I've ever met. And then Emiliano, who's the CCO of Mancala, obviously got a lot of experience developing mobile optimized games with a lot of engagement tools, which are obviously very, very important for retention. So guys, maybe to get started, Daniel, I know that Genius Sports is renowned as a very kind of data-driven company. So what kind of data have you guys seen around smartphone usage in Africa? And maybe a disclaimer first, I think we all know that Africa is very nuanced and every market is different in its own way. For the purposes of this discussion, I think we'll be speaking in pretty general terms and may jump into some of the more specific markets. But with that said, Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think today when I was sort of preparing notes for this, I sort of thought to myself, often we sit in these kind of panels, we discuss the same things, we bring up the same points. So I've really tried to make sure that some of my points are hopefully a little bit different and quite insightful to everybody in the audience. But sort of just kind of moving into the topic itself. I think when we talk about mobile, it's more than just mobile in itself, right? Across Africa, we have so many different types of devices, which will ultimately determine the kind of data that operators and marketing teams can collect from these players, which I'll touch on in a moment. But in South Africa, we largely have an Android user base with a lot of your upmarket players coming from your sort of iOS side of things. And then you sort of venture a bit deeper into Africa, and we're predominantly Android within your sort of more wealthier players. But the majority of these African markets are using what we call feature phones, or often defined as other devices, I suppose. Now, there's a number of limitations with these feature devices or these feature phones. Of course, they're fantastic because they're moving the mobile market forward in Africa, and they're opening betting companies up to audiences that maybe they weren't able to reach before. But in the same manner, they do offer huge limitations in the types of data that operators can collect through these devices to more accurately market and talk to these players going forward. So that was one of the main points I wanted to touch on. It. And although, again, it is opening up doors, it is still a huge hurdle for marketing teams in Africa to be talking to players because of the devices they're using.
I mean, maybe just on that point, Conor, I know you've been operating in the African market for many years, and obviously it's developed quite a lot, and the phones and stuff that people are using have developed. Like, what have you seen over the years in terms of African punters?
Yeah, you make me sound really old the way you're phrasing that. So I've been operating in Africa for about 8 years. I say 10 years to round it up, but then as I get older, I hate rounding things up. When I got down to Kenya first, so that was the first market I operated in. It was still, huge share of the market was USSD, even SMS betting. Worked with some really good experts in the SMS and USSD field. And it was a struggle to create an experience for customers that would engage them. All you ever really had on that customer was their mobile number, and trying to market to them and so on was just extremely challenging. It obviously evolved into online. Originally, at the start it was just web apps, and then we obviously saw more Android and to a lesser extent iOS as the years have gone on. The Africa, I think, was a huge driver in the whole mobile gaming side. I think it evolved quicker into mobile on feature phones before obviously the rest of the world. I think at this point gaming is predominantly mobile, and I think Africa is just in line with that. I think the difference with Africa now is, I guess, the share on iOS is a lot lower. You probably have a lot more stats on that than me. And I think overall, from an operator's perspective, your customer values are very, very different, depending on what channel they come in. So obviously your feature phone, customers are quite low value in comparison. Web are more, and Android. And then when you get to iOS, that's where you get a lot of your VIP players, especially in casino and so on. So there's been a massive evolution over the years. And I think really it's just in line with global markets at the moment. I don't think it stands out as any different, except maybe not as much adoption around apps.
Yeah. Well, maybe just to dig into that a little bit deeper, Emiliano, obviously as a European providing services to people in Africa, how do you guys look at the market, and how do you see the African mobile consumer to be different to perhaps a more European type player?
Well, I think we need to understand that technology needs to adapt to the market. It needs to adapt to the audience that you're catering to. It's very different to compare markets because each market has their own nuances that you need to attend. Africa particularly is very interesting to read the history, especially as they mentioned about the penetration of mobiles being one of the first, let's say, areas that jump and let's keep desktop right altogether. In this line, I think new technologies that we've been incorporating, especially for data compression, allow us to cater high-quality games without sacrifice the download size, which is one of the principal objectives that we have. Considering that there's a lot of players that they add in volume, right? That maybe they don't have the means to get high package of data, but they want to be entertained. You don't want them to spend the data in the download itself. Of course, there's always going to be issues, right? There's no perfect solution, but I think all companies should be working in this direction. Considering that you're always going to face latency issues, right? We see that a lot, for example, in Asia, where the connections are not so strong. However, Africa has a robust mobile network, so it's more about the download side that we're focusing on without sacrificing the engagement experience that we can give to the players. Because at the end of the day, the engagement and the participation of the players is what you want. You want them to come back all the time. They want to be entertained. They want to be able to win. They want to have a good experience. An experience that can only be improved with the right technology, right? And that's quite important for any technological company, no matter where they are, is to understand the player, understand the issues that they're facing in order for you to select the correct technology in order to cater these experiences for them.
Okay. And I mean, there you mentioned like meeting the players where they are. So Daniel, I know you guys do a lot of work in the acquisition space, and given the mobile economy in Africa, how do you guys look at acquisition differently, and how do you think it should be done in order to cater for that mobile customer?
Yeah, I think when I saw this question come up on like the pre-briefing, I was quite excited because I think what mobile has enabled brands to do is to, of course, reach more players, reach more people, but also to be a little bit more clever and agile in terms of we bring localization up all the time on these panels, from product to marketing. But I speak a lot about demographics in marketing, and I think it's something that in Africa it can be improved on. But mobile in itself has a lot of opportunities that operators could be taking or making better use of in that sense. And I can give you an example. I believe a Gen Z type of player in Africa, not only do you find them in different places, so typical Gen Z you might find on TikTok or Snapchat, or these are platforms where you can find these younger players. But I also believe that you need to be speaking to these younger people or each demographic in their own lingo, in their own language, right? If any of you have or know anyone, or if you've got a son or a daughter who's in their teens, you know they speak English, but it's almost a completely different language, right? And these kinds of people are entering the betting market, right? The people who are becoming 18, 19. And you need to be talking to people in their own language and segmenting them away from people who are in their 20s and 30s who you would speak to and market to in different lingo and use their language, while finding them on their own platforms, which are more like X and these kind of places. So I think we'll see a progression in the next few years of operators using different channels to find people in different demographics and then speaking to them very differently, both through the offers and the lingos that they use. I'm really excited about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then obviously once we've got those players through the door is one thing. Onboarding them and getting them into the action, we know is super important. And I think we all know how important easy payments are in that process. And Africa is obviously renowned for innovation in that space. So, Conor, how has that landscape changed? And, I know that every territory has its own nuance and differences. Like, which operators do you think are doing it well, and which territories do you think are well set up for that?
Yeah, so obviously if to split Africa, we're speaking generally, but obviously Nigeria and South Africa have slightly different payments than the rest of Africa. A lot of my experiences with mobile money, so originating in Kenya, Tanzania, East Africa, and into West Africa and so on. I think obviously mobile money initially came in as an extension of the cash economy, allowing people basically take cash up onto a digital wallet and then transact peer to peer, and the services grew over time, with gaming being one of the key drivers in that. You will see across Africa a lot of historically cash economies now are evolving towards mobile money, so French-speaking markets and so on, which has completely changed the game. So it's moving gaming from retail and from agent models, right into a fully, a full mobile online experience. I think the innovation originally was, instant payouts. I think that's just standard at this point. If you don't have instant payouts with mobile money, you don't have, an operation. I think some of the operators that have really innovated outside of that would be, Sporty, for example, in Nigeria. I think they were the first to introduce instant payouts in that market, because that was predominantly cards and banking solutions and so on. Other than that, I just think it's standard now. Unless you offer, instant payouts, a streamlined solution, you just don't have an operation. I think one of the areas you do see in payments that's changing is, there are a lot more solutions for offshore players in Africa now. So historically, to get access to payments, you would need a local license and so on, and get a connection either through an aggregator or directly with an operator. Now there are solutions that offer it for offshore operators, which I think that in itself is going to change the market in a huge way. because it allows a lot of the great players come in and compete on promotions and bonuses and so on, because they're basically not paying taxes locally. So I think that's a major issue, a major change. I think crypto, not everyone agrees, but I think crypto is becoming a larger and larger piece of the action as well. You've got some of the biggest operators in the world now starting to target Africa. And I think, crypto fits the African market. It allows people to take, cash out of the economy, hide it away from the mobile operators and banks and so on. So I see that area growing over time. I think for the start, crypto is more of like a hedge and a kind of payments channel peer-to-peer. I think over time that'll become more of an e-commerce solution for Africans. So that's
cool, interesting. Then once those players have actually made their deposits and their accounts are ready to go, we've got to make sure that we're engaging them properly on mobile platforms. So, Emiliano, we know crash games really took off in Africa over the last few years. And, with this in mind, how do you think operators and service providers should be thinking about, mobile gameplay and how they engage players in session?
I think it's important for the operators to be able to cross-sell the different verticals in different markets. I think Crash itself has become so big because of the simplicity that it has and the similarity in how the betting is presented to the players in terms with the familiarity that they already have from the bookkeepers, right? This simplicity, we see it also in traction in multiple markets worldwide. And it's not a coincidence itself. Even though it still represents, let's say, a small part of the whole GGR between the verticals, it is continuously growing. And I think it's important to have as many options for the players all the time. You don't want to lose the players just because you don't have the option they're looking for, right? But at the same time, as we mentioned before, you don't want the player to be bored. You want the player to be able to experience different verticals, right? To find what they organically like and retain them over there with different strategies. As Daniel pointed out, segmentation is critical here. To be able to do the cross-selling, to have the right bonus at the right time, as also Conor was mentioning, is quite critical for the operators worldwide. I think you can see now diversification of the type of promotions across different markets. That's something always important to take a look at what other operators are doing worldwide. Because at the end of the day, you never know what's going to be the big thing, right, coming up. I think all of us are trying to figure it out, and that's why we're here. But on that line, I don't think operators are in a position that they can risk these players who are quite expensive to acquire just because they don't have the right content or the right bonus or the right technology at the right time, right? It's already hard enough to acquire these customers worldwide, to have the liberty to lose them for something as simple as that.
And that's obviously more in the kind of casino games, crash games side of things. Conor, we also know that African punters are very unique in the way that they approach sports betting. How do you think operators should be, thinking about that and keeping in mind, again, mobile guys probably looking for massive multiples? How do you think they should be building the sports betting experience around that?
Yeah, there's certain key features you almost have to have if you're operating in Africa. Simple things like bet slip bonuses, multi-bet bonuses, and so on, to encourage those long long leg multiples. I think the dynamic is changing a little bit in Africa. It's still bet small, win big, on mass market. But I think and I think Genius can speak to that. I think there's more and more in play entering, and that's changing the dynamic slightly. It just depends on the market. If you look at Africa as a whole, yes, big multiples, bet small, win big is still a large component. But markets like Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, there's a lot of shifts as the players become more mature. But definitely there's a number of key features you have to have, bet sharing, all those type of things that allow your influencers engage, and your local affiliates and so on. So, But there's a checklist, 5-6 things. If you don't have them, you're not going to succeed. And you still find operators coming in without them. So it makes no sense.
Okay, we are running very tight on time here. Obviously, a very deep subject matter, something we could talk about for 20 hours rather than 20 minutes. But unfortunately, we are going to have to cut it short here. Maybe just to sum up, it's very clear that mobile and smartphones are here in Africa. They're coming. The penetration is nowhere near where it is in other markets, but there's going to be a lot of development there over the coming years. And with African players, and I say African players, but players in every different African market having different expectations, it's something that really needs to be carefully considered on a case-by-case basis when you're looking at different markets. So, guys, thank you very much for joining. Sorry we couldn't go on for longer, but it's been a pleasure.